Anti-Flag. Anti-Flag. Edre here with another album review, and I am going to be reviewing today the new Anti-Flag album, 2020 Vision. A little bit of backstory on Anti-Flag. Anti-Flag has been around since the 80s, but really kind of started releasing heavily in the 90s with having that kind of signature skate punk sound, but much more politicized, much more aggressive sounding. And the album Die for Government is actually one of my I think it's one of their best albums. That's really like their first big one. And 2006 Blood and Empire, that one is another pretty solid album. For the most part, they're a pretty decent punk band. Anyone that knows me knows I'm pretty fond of punk music. I left my fan on again. There we go. Either way, I'm very fond of punk music when it is done correctly. But, it's been a weird time for it. The past decade has seen it have a massive decline in the mainstream. As compared to the 90s and 2000s, we saw the rise of skate punk and eventually the pop punk movement, as well as emo. And you could argue with me all day if this is punk or if it's not punk. I don't care. I really do not care. Either way, this album is a very political album. 2020 Vision is, I think, their 12th studio album, but focuses heavily on the modern political climate of America. And there are times where I think that they executed well, and times that I think it is executed very poorly. For example, the opener has a lot of Trump samples in it. And he's one of those guys where you have to be clever if you're going to be using his sample. Because you do realize that he's a current president, and that, in the future, it may end up looking a little corny if what you're saying doesn't really ring with audiences. And I don't know, personally I think the usage of the samples didn't turn out as good as I think they originally thought it would. That being said, when they go more political, it isn't that big of an issue for me. I think whatever they're a punk band, they've always been political. This isn't surprising. I don't have my main flaws with the album do not come from the fact it is political. The instrumentals, however, are very much just what I've come to expect. And this is the issue with a lot of punk bands. I mean, punk is, I think, one of the most pure genres. I don't care if it's original punk, hardcore punk, if it's skate punk, pop punk, post-hardcore, or even, like, post-punk. I think it's one of the most pure genres on the planet. But the problem is, when these bands start getting older and they start to be around for a long time, it becomes much and much harder to really make a really strong, hard-hitting punk album when your instrumentals sound the same. And that's my issue with it, is that good bands know when to change their instrumentals. And this even goes for punk bands, which are kind of praised for being more simplistic. I mean, bands like Bad Religion and even a band like The Offspring has massively changed what they originally sounded like. And to me, unfortunately, this Anti-Flag album sounds a lot like what we've heard before, especially within the past 10 years. And I will say that the instrumentals aren't bad, but many of the songs are bland and relatively forgettable. But I gotta say, though, the passion behind this album, I give them props for it. They're clearly really into this album. They're clearly passionate about the political, stuff that they're speaking about here, which I do appreciate. I do definitely appreciate. And it doesn't sound like a forced political record like I've heard from other artists, especially in the punk genre. But, I mean, two of the real standout songs for me that I think were two of the best ones is The Disease, for one. I think Disease may have that four-chord pattern that you find in many punk and pop music, but I think that it's a pop-punk banger. The Disease song, I mean, the lyrics are actually well-written here. I think the instrumental is basic enough, but has that kind of catchy melody to it that I can actually get behind this, and I genuinely do enjoy what I am hearing. And the second one is the song Un-American towards the very end of the album. This song gives me kind of folk punk, a little bit of Dropkick Murphy vibes, but it's a lot more laid back, and it's really the one really laid back song on this album. And surprisingly, I think it's one of the more impactful songs. Lyrically, its subject matter, is I feel like it hits harder behind an instrumental such as this. And I think these two songs are by far the best, but it doesn't carry the entire album, and there are songs that I just find very bland and forgettable. Hence why Don't Let the Bastards Get You Down is my least favorite song on the album. It's the epitome of what I just said. And his vocals, the singer's vocals, it's what I've come to expect. I feel like he does go a little more out on the screaming a bit on this album, but in general, I think that it's like this album doesn't sound as original as it would have sounded 15, 20 years ago. I think that they've made better records throughout their career. When I actually put it in perspective, this album is just kind of very right in the middle for me. I appreciate the passion. I appreciate the political stance that they're trying to make here. But I just personally think some of the samples can be cringy, as well as some of the vocals. And the instrumentals as well, I think, are very bland. I've heard them before, and I do find them a little uninteresting, not gonna lie. But I give them props for carrying the punk torch into the new decade. This is the first punk album I've heard this decade, so I give it to them. But at the end of the day, after really thinking it through, I've settled on giving this album a light 5. I don't know why this is so bright, but I don't know. I'm not really feeling this album too much, and I don't want you guys to get the wrong idea. It's not because it's punk and I think punk's dead. I think punk is alive and well. It depends on the artist. Like, for example, I'm going to eventually make a video of my top punk artists, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for putting Green Day #1, but that is because of their great solid discography up until American Idiot and that great 90s run, as well as a few stuff here and there after. I don't care if you call them a sellout. They still, to me, are a punk band. But they have a new album coming out. They're probably going to be the next punk album I really review this year. I am worried about it because that one doesn't seem to be looking too good. But that's not the point of this video. Anti-Flag 2020 Vision. Light 5. Not bad, not good, but, the passion is enough. The passion behind this album is enough to give it a listen.